Their Excellencies, their colleagues, a good from Newport and a good afternoon in Europe, maybe even a good evening other places. It takes me a great pleasure to warmly welcome you to today's celebration of the International Day of Biological Diversity. I'm really very pleased that we could bring together so many high-level representatives from many countries and regions to participate in this virtual discussion, even during these challenging times. Your commitment to joining us here today is an evidence that it is becoming increasingly clear that biological diversity is the basis for addressing most aspects of sustainable development, and that we need to raise awareness of this important fact. And we must all play our part. My own country, Norway, has a deep connection to this issue through our dedication over the last decade on efforts to protect tropical forests, providing significant resources to address the root causes of deforestation in partnership with tropical forest countries. And as a coastal nation that depends on the oceans, we are deeply committed to global ocean sustainability and biological diversity. This was the driving force behind our Prime Minister initiative to launch the high-level panel for a sustainable ocean economy. And I look forward to hearing from all of you on your own contribution to this very important issue. Dear colleagues, 2020 was to be a super year for nature. This has now been overshadowed by the unprecedented crisis we face with COVID-19. But we should not let this hold us back. This year has the potential to become a year of reflection and a year of opportunity and solutions. This is reinforced by the theme of this year's International Day for Biological Diversity, since that is, our solutions are in the nature. And as I leave you with that thought, let me introduce the first speaker, His Excellency Mr. Tijani Muhammad Banda, President of the United Nations General Assembly. I'm really so delighted, President, that you could join us today. You have
Excellencies, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, I thank the organizers of today's online high-level meeting on diversity, the missions of Norway, Belize, Costa Rica, China, Ecuador, Egypt, France, Gabon, Germany, Italy, Kenya, Philippines, and as well as the Convention on Biological Diversity Secretariat. As the world contends with the COVID-19 pandemic, we are becoming increasingly aware of the fragility of our way of life. This global health challenge is putting unprecedented strain on our health systems and economies, deepening inequalities and hitting the most vulnerable the hardest. We face a dual challenge posed by both diversity loss and climate change, which has not receded. As the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development illustrates, global challenges are interconnected. The continuing loss of biodiversity and ecosystems increases the risk of disease emergence and spread among people, animals, and other living species. Furthermore, deforestation continues to be a leading contributor to climate change. Hunger has been on the rise for the past 3 years. Prior to the disruption caused by the virus, there were 821 million people undernourished and 2 billion people experiencing malnutrition. Under the prevailing crisis, this number is rising. Compounding this further, food security is being undercut by biodiversity loss, desertification, and shocks due to climate change, with 1 million plants and species facing extinction. 3/4 of the world's crops are dependent upon pollinators, which, with these tiny insects contributing more than $575 billion to the global economy. Yet the numbers of these insects, which form the foundation of the global food security, are collapsing rapidly. Excellencies, we must take urgent action to halt biodiversity loss, including among insects and pollinators, just as we must save 1 million animal and plant species that face imminent extinction. This year marks the beginning of the decade of action and delivery for the Sustainable Development Goals, and is a super year focused on nature. Nature-based solutions have the capacity to protect, sustainably manage, and restore both natural and modified ecosystems. Moreover, nature-based solutions can address the challenges posed by climate change, natural disasters, and food and water security. We cannot delay taking action towards systemic change if we are to ensure our future as humanity. The UN Summit on Biodiversity presents us with a key opportunity to build political momentum and to recommit to ensuring progress to achieve the 2020 Global Biodiversity Framework in line with the 2030 Agenda. There is still time, Excellencies, to reverse our loss of nature, but we must act now. I call on world leaders, the private sector, and civil society to chart a way forward. A whole society approach is needed to safeguard biodiversity and ecosystem services and advance nature-based solutions for people and planet. I urge leaders to recommit to the Paris Climate Agreement, the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development, and the Addis Ababa Action Agenda. We have a shared responsibility to secure a healthy planet for humans and for all forms of life, without which humanity cannot survive. Excellencies, distinguished colleagues, on this International Day for Biological Diversity, let us recommit to prioritizing nature-based solutions at all levels as we build back better. I am confident that together we can create an inclusive, resilient, and sustainable world for all. I thank you.
I thank the General Assembly, and once again let me thank you for being with us here today, Mr. President, on such an important issue. We really appreciate your presence. So thank you. I will now have the pleasure to introduce to you Mr. Sveinung Rotevatn, in his capacity as President of UNEA 5 and Minister of Climate and Environment of Norway. Mr. Rotevatn, you have the floor.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, Your Excellencies. I hope you can all hear me, and I hope that you are all doing well and staying healthy in this time of a global pandemic. I am nevertheless very pleased to be able to participate in this online event on the International Day for Biodiversity. I hope that this event will be the first of many in 2021 on the road to the 5th UN Environment Assembly in Nairobi, on to the Biodiversity Summit in New York, and then the... I look forward to engaging with a broad range of stakeholders in this process, including business, indigenous peoples and local communities, and civil society, to discuss actions for nature. Today, I mainly speak in my capacity as President for the 5th Environmental Assembly. Of course, the Assembly will not just be about biodiversity, but biodiversity is at the core of the theme and is indeed rising on the political agenda and will be an important part of the topics discussed. The IPBES global assessment is clear. There is an urgent need for ambitious, effective, and innovative actions for nature. Protecting biodiversity is a fundamental condition for sustainable development and essential if we are to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals. Protecting nature is also key for climate change mitigation and adaptation. The theme of the UN Environment Assembly is strengthening actions for nature to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals. This is, of course, also what COP15 in China is all about. So there is indeed a very strong link. Following COVID-19, the theme has not lost its relevance. In my view, it has only increased. It allows us to consider the relationship between COVID-19 and the environment. We need to better understand the risks of destroying habitats of animals and plants in the wild, in the emergence and spread of zoonotic viruses, and the benefits of safeguarding healthy. We must work with nature, not against nature. We need a green recovery, or to build back better when we start to rebuild our post-pandemic society. The UN Environment Assembly can make a difference. Together, we can act for nature. Preparations continue throughout this year, and I am staying actively involved. I greatly appreciate the inputs I have received over the last few weeks on what kind of critical elements that the UNEA Ministerial Declaration and the Assembly should contain. We need to learn from each other to succeed. In June, I will host stakeholder consultations to foster dialogue between governments and academia, the private sector, and civil society on topics related to the theme to prepare for the Environment Assembly. The Conference of the Parties of the Convention on Biological Diversity, or COP15, is to take place in Kunming, China next year. I'm happy that China is participating here, and I look forward to hearing their current thinking. You can rely on our full support to ensure the Kunming meeting achieves its very important objective, which is the adoption of the new global biodiversity framework. The framework will play a crucial role to pave the way for biodiversity action. The Summit on Biodiversity in New York in September is another major milestone on the road to Kunming. Heads of state will come together to commit and signal their support for an ambitious outcome. The framework itself should, in my view, be universal, aid us to reverse the loss of nature, and help us deliver on the Sustainable Development Goals and the Paris Agreement. Let's make it the most important multilateral environmental agreement for the next decade, and let us join forces in doing so. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister, and thank you so much for joining us from Oslo this afternoon. It is now my pleasure to introduce the Minister of Environment and Energy of Costa Rica, Mr. Carlos Manuel Rodriguez. You have the floor, Minister.
Thank you, Ambassador, and good day, good afternoon, Excellencies, and dear friends. I hope that all of you are doing safe during this pandemic days. Definitely, the humankind is going through very rough conditions these days. We are like surfers surfing in the ocean. And as a surfer, we are looking at the horizon where we see the set, the groundswell coming towards us. And the first wave that we see in the set is a medium-sized wave that is called COVID-19. And as a surfer, they tend to believe that we can surf that wave perfectly, without understanding that behind that first wave, COVID-19, we'll have bigger and stronger waves. The second wave is the social inequality wave that we humans, in this analogy as a surfer, need to be able to surf properly. And behind that social inequality wave, there's a third wave coming, bigger and stronger. That wave is called loss of biodiversity. And behind that other wave, the fourth wave that humankind will be confronted very soon is the biggest of all, which is climate change. In this respect, we need to be able to understand that to serve all of those waves properly and be able to survive them, we need to really have a comprehensive approach on how we generate this positive synergy within social and economic development in the context of nature conservation. And I think that two things are quite important in this stage, in this moment. In order to address the big wave of biodiversity loss and climate change, we need to be able to really be flexible and very well focused on how we mobilize resources at the global level. Many reports indicate that in order to protect nature, and when I say protect nature, is responding to what the scientific community tells us that by 2030, we should be protecting at least 30% of the oceans and the planet. We need to be able to mobilize around $140 billion annually to protect nature, to consolidate that 30% of the planet. You may believe that $140 billion is a lot of money, but if we compare that to global GDP, that is nothing. Global GDP stands around $87 trillion. So $140 billion for nature conservation by 2030 is just 0.008% of global GDP. Unfortunately, we only invest in nature conservation around $82 billion annually, which is, again, a small fraction of global GDP. So how do we align societies, businesses, policies, in governments in a way that we can mobilize resources from all sources? I think that we need to concentrate on 5 elements. One is government should continue to raise the level of ambition and be able to allocate resources from all sources in a way that can help us implement, particularly the new post-2020 CBD framework. The second point that I believe we need to concentrate is that public and private actors must coordinate, scale up finance in sectors beyond conservation. We will never achieve our conservation goals if we don't do the cross-cutting approach. The third element is that all financial sectors should seek full alignment with the Paris Agreement and the new new framework, the new CBD framework that we are negotiating within all operations. The fourth element is that capital markets and banks should shift rapidly toward green finance. And lastly, but not less important, we need to really phase out negative investments and subsidies. I think that creating those policy approaches, being able to understand that the return on investing in nature conservation gives us a high profit, particularly in terms of human well-being, and understanding that there is enough resources at the global level to achieve a high ambition in terms of climate and biodiversity should be the approach in the aftermath of COVID-19. Thank you all. Have a good day. And I wish you all a very happy Global Biodiversity Day.
Thank you so much, Mr. Minister, for also you taking part in this very important discussion and for your opening statement. May I then move to the next speaker for this opening segment, and that is Mrs. Elizabeth Maruna Mrera, Active Executive Secretary, Convention on Biological Diversity. You have the floor, madam.
Thank you very much. dear President of the General Assembly, Mr. Mohamed Bande, distinguished ministers, President of the 5th meeting of the United Nations Environment Assembly, His Excellency Mr. Rotterdam, representatives of member states, stakeholders, dear colleagues. Let me thank all member states who have worked hard to put this event together. And I want to thank you, Her Excellency Ms. Mona Yul, for your welcome and all the work for this event. I want to wish everybody a happy International Day for Biodiversity and call upon us all to appreciate nature's innumerable contributions to our everyday lives and to reflect on how it connects us all. Our celebration this year, unfortunately, takes place at the time when the world is trying to resurface out of the COVID-19 pandemic. We stand in solidarity with the people around the world. COVID-19 equally serves us as a stark reminder that we need urgent, sweeping action and international cooperation and solidarity to protect biodiversity, and in so doing, human health for generations to come. The theme for this year's Biodiversity Day is Our Solutions Are in Nature, and thus highly relevant to the current period as well as to the future. From nature-based solutions to climate change, to food, water security, and sustainable livelihoods, biodiversity remains the basis for a sustainable future. It is key to achieving the Sustainable Development Goals. Communities are facing the danger of an even more unprecedented negative economic, social, and human consequences if we don't act now and adopt the way of life in harmony with nature. Biodiversity loss is a direct result of our short-sighted human activities that have degraded the ecosystems and created the conditions that have led to the events like the pandemic. Even in the current context, we all need to take actions to build a resilient and sustainable global economy that incorporates nature at its heart as we build back better from the crisis. We urge governments to use the occasion of comprehensive recovery plans to build economies founded on the conservation and sustainable use of biodiversity and equitable sharing of the benefits. This will support all, especially the most vulnerable groups. Recovery plans that include ecosystems restoration and a transition to biodiversity-friendly economies will create more greener jobs and provide decent livelihoods. They will also reduce the risk of emergency of diseases in the future. We need the world to continue to work ambitious and effective post-2020 global biodiversity framework to be agreed next year at our Conference of the Parties. This framework can contribute to increasing nature's benefits for the people. The results will be extensive, including improved global nutrition and access to drinking water, resilience to natural disasters, to achieve the Paris Agreement on climate change. All these are integral to the Sustainable Development Goals, which risks being undermined by the biodiversity loss. This pandemic has shown us in clear terms that international cooperation and solidarity is important for the health of our nature, our economies, and our people. Let us work together and support solutions that are in the nature. We are living on this planet, and there's no other planet to go. Hence, we need to guard it as a precious stone. Happy Biodiversity Day, and I look forward to our discussions. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Elizabeth, if I may, and thank you for setting the stage for our ministerial discussions that we will now start. And the first participant in our discussion today is His Excellency Dr. Yasmin Fouad, President of COP14 and Minister of the Environment of Egypt. Mr. Fouad, you have the floor.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Your Excellency. Among you here today in this virtual meeting on celebration of the Biodiversity Day. I really, as all of you know, we wish that we would celebrate differently, would celebrate with nature and among different natural habitats. But that's our destiny, that we would be living in that time, not only facing the global, but also leave the planet, the only planet that we have. 1,000 times, even before the COVID-19, our natural resources, our natural habitat. And we've been striving hard in every single path, in every single venue of the multilateral conventions in order to restore our ecosystem. However, as we are now living and in this moment, and we are given the responsibility of saving that planet, I think that there are 3 key messages that would be very important that I would like to address our meeting with today in my capacity as being the president of the COP14. First and utmost, like all my other colleagues have emphasized, we have an opportunity of preparing and putting in front of our world and our future generation a global post-2020 biodiversity framework. A framework that I think should be ambitious, implementable, time-bound, as well as fair and balanced. The Open Working Group had started its negotiation in order to come up with such a balanced framework. But it's not really about targets, because we all know that the Aichi targets that our predecessors have also put, it was hard to be implementable and achieved. So the idea of being implementable is not only about having the targets and pushing the bar high, but also having the means of implementation. And here I would stress on not only the financial resources that we all that know that they are rigid with all the conventions and the targets and the SDGs that are there around, but also the human resources. And here I would like to open a very important point, is that we've invested so much in all the policies, the framework, the strategies, the projects, but we did not invest heavily in the human beings. We did not invest in the human resources, in the youth, in understanding and making that linkages between our planet, our development, our resources, and our humanity. So I seize the opportunity to say August consultation meeting that will focus on the link between the COVID and the environment. We need to focus also on how the framework will be implemented and where are the resources for that. The next UN summit in September on the biodiversity is key to get more solidarity, more cooperation, and more collaboration at the level of the heads of state. And we need, on the second message that would link also to that the biodiversity alone will not resolve it. We cannot restore the ecosystem alone. We need to be wise and know that our financial resources is not sufficient. So how can we play that smartly? We can play that smartly by linking the climate change, biodiversity, and land degradation, going back to where the conventions were born. They were together, and we did split them willingly and intentionally, and then started to see how can we best do a better job. Finally, an inclusive is important, but here the inclusive process is not only to are concerned by the environment and the biodiversity and bringing different hats around the table, such as government, NGOs, partners. We need to work more deeper on other development sectors, on really working on mainstreaming the biodiversity in other sectors. We can put our target on the utmost important sectors of planning and finance. And then we go in cluster on other sectors that really do have an impact. Those are the main three messages that I would like to deliver on the day of the Biodiversity International Day. And yes, we need nature. Nature does not need us. We need to save our planet. Nature is surviving without us, with the partial lockdown and the full lockdown that is happening all around the world. And I really wish from the bottom of my heart that in August, that in next year, we, with other development partners, with the sectors that have negative impact on the biodiversity, be celebrating nature on the ground. Thank you so very much, and a very happy Biodiversity Day.
Thank you so much, Honorable Minister, Mrs. Jassim Fouad, for your very inspiring statement. I now give the floor to Mr. Paulo Pruano, Minister of Environment of Ecuador. You have the floor, sir.
Thanks for giving me the floor. It is an honor for Ecuador to be able to participate in this virtual high-level discussion on the occasion of the International Day for Biological Diversity, under the theme, Our Solutions Are in Nature. Especially under the current circumstances we are all passing with the pandemic. We hope all of you are safe. I would like to start by thanking the Secretariat of the Convention of Biological Diversity, the Permanent Mission of Norway, and the Permanent Mission of Costa Rica to the United Nations for organizing this event. It is now more important than ever to evaluate the contribution of biological diversity in our common agenda. Not only do we need to evaluate our economic model, but also to guarantee social welfare and conservation of natural resources. The spread of COVID-19 has taught us about the direct link between human health and health in ecosystems. Protecting biodiversity, combating climate change, ending illegal wildlife trade, ensuring the safe management of chemicals and waste are some examples that prevent the destruction of the natural buffer zones that normally separate humans from animals and build an harmonic relationship between humans and nature. More than a quarter of a century has passed since the adoption of the Convention of Biological Diversity. Ecuador was one of the first countries to ratify it. Since then, many national efforts have been done to reach these objectives. We have established protect areas on one of the main strategies of conservation, which is directly linked to the first CBD's objective. In fact, 51% of our natural forests are under conservation. Nevertheless, it's not enough, and as additional national efforts are still needed. International cooperation is needed to consolidate the areas that make up the national system of protected areas. Regarding the second and third objectives of the CBD, we are going through an initial phase with our national actions, aiming at promoting the sustainable use of biodiversity and development projects, oriented at the fair and equitable distribution of benefits generated by biodiversity and its components. The strategic plan for biodiversity and its IT targets have become a guide for the elaboration and implementation of various national biodiversity planning instruments, one of them being the National Biodiversity Strategy and its Action Plan 2015. As we are now building the post-2020 biodiversity framework, we call for an ambitious, strong, and realistic plan in line with current challenge reactivation, the strength of public health systems, and the provision of essential service. Thus, we don't jeopardize the achievement of the 2030 agenda. By 2020, the country has directly aligned each CDG with the objectives, policies, and goals of the National Development Plan, identifying targeting resources, as well as strengthening national planning, monitoring, and evaluation exercise. It is important that the post-2020 biodiversity framework includes a reference of the 3 objectives of the Convention and its protocols, and establishes synergies with other international instruments, such as the Paris Agreement and Agenda 2030. Ecuador is one of the 20 worldwide megadiverse countries. Biodiversity and its new framework must consider elements such as environmental justice, the linkage between biodiversity, food security, and climate change, provide special attention to local communities and indigenous people, promote gender equality, foster ecosystems restoration, access and benefit sharing governance. The role of civil society, academia, and private sector in this process has the foremost importance. On the occasions of the International Day of Biological Diversity, Ecuador remains committed to work at the national, regional, and international level to develop and implement nature-based solutions. We are prioritizing the development of science and knowledge, health and well-being at economic strength, based on a bioeconomy aspect that allow us to live in harmony with nature. Thank you very much, and a happy day of biodiversity.
Thank you so much, Minister Puano, Minister of Environment of Ecuador. I now would like to introduce to you Minister Sergio Costa, Minister of Environment of Italy. You have the floor, sir.
I would like to thank Norway for giving me for the chance to take the floor. Today, is important for us. And this is proved by the COVID-19, because there is a strong connection between the COVID-19 and the biodiversity. I would like to start by the slogan that we've chosen for the day. Our solutions are in nature. In this adjective, our, we have our hope, our solidarity, our resolve to work together in harmony with nature.
Det är nog sekretariat som kan bryta in.
The link between the loss of biodiversity and the health requires us to put the environment and the sustainability at the center of our policies to build back better. Many of the zoonoses of the animal diseases that we are facing are the direct consequence of the loss of habitats and biodiversity, of the loss of forests, of the creation of artificial environments, of the illegal wildlife trade. And what we have before us with the health emergency is a strong signal. We also know that the coral reefs are threatened by sea rise level, or that the fires are stronger where there is no management of forests, and that the weather events are more extreme where we have put nature aside. So we need to reverse the trend. And this is the moment to be more ambitious and more smart in making projects for the future. We need to work with. We cannot go back to the step that we were before. We need to take a step ahead now, and we have a chance to do it. I am favorable to do this step ahead, and we are doing it in Italy with several decrees, a decree on climate, a decree on budget, and a decree on the recovery. We have important dates for 2021. It will be a super year for environment, and we will have crucial steps to make. We need to work as much as possible to raise our ambitions for the COP15 on biodiversity and for the COP26 on climate changes. Because for the last event, we are co-chairs as with the UK, and as Italy, we will be the host of the G20, and we will focus on environment during this meeting. We will have to use a holistic approach. And according to this holistic approach, when the challenges are interconnected, and I'm talking about climate change, biodiversity loss, degradation, soil degradation, and oxygen depletion in the oceans, we can use these challenges as positive solutions. We can deal with our stable know-how, our scientific and academic scholars, our experiences. The solutions, the nature-based solutions, can generate many benefits for the environment. I'm thinking about riparian buffers. I'm thinking about remediation systems. I'm thinking about the adaptation to defend the coastal areas or the dune restorations along the coasts. I'm thinking about the urban reforestation and sustainable forestation. But we cannot protect biodiversity only to protect the natural heritage. We also need to protect it to ensure the well-being of society and of economy. So how can we act? First of all, we have to eliminate the subsidies that are harmful to biodiversity. And we need to promote a narrow cooperation between the different ministries and the local authorities and make them able to reach achievements and objectives that usually they cannot achieve alone. We need to be more ambitious in the negotiations in the COP15 in China for the global framework on biodiversity. And we will need to include many stakeholders in this process, such as in industries, financial sectors, trading sectors, and obviously the citizens. And for ambitious, I mean that we need to reach at least 30% of protected areas on the total of the land and seas surfaces of the Earth by 2030. The world is now facing a serious pandemic, it's the COVID, and the attention is focused on this pandemic. But we need to bear in mind that we have a great opportunity with this pandemic. We can change the environmental paradigm and the economic paradigm of our societies. We can change it through the collaboration. We can change it through the mobilization of all the international stakeholders for a just transition. So it is the moment to take a brave actions, mostly on behalf of the youth. And in Italy, we will have this pre-COP event with all the young generations called Youth for Climate. Investing in nature means investing in our future, which is based on nature. And the philosophy in which we take inspiration from is the same that will lead us towards our future action. This is the compass that will guide our future actions. Thank you.
I thank the distinguished minister from Italy, and it now takes me a great pleasure to introduce His Excellency Dr. Omar Fingerwa, Minister of Fisheries, the Environment and Sustainable Development of Belize. You have the floor, sir.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I am pleased to commemorate International Biodiversity Day with the international community today. I do so with the fervent hope that 2020 will be the dawn of a new, positively impactful relationship between humans and nature. No doubt, despair may be more immediately felt as we witness and experience the tragic collision of the two in the COVID-19 pandemic and in the climate crisis. Fueling that despair are the scientific findings of nature's unprecedented decline. Within a decade, we are warned that up to 1 million plant and animal species could face extinction. If this were to come to pass, it would be a tragedy for people and for the planet. The environment's sudden reprieve from the relentless pace of human activity in the past months has been the silver lining of COVID-19 for some. If not a silver lining, it certainly is a foreshadowing of the world that we could have. For Belize and for the small island developing states I represent, this is the world we strive for. Getting there from where we stand now requires far-reaching transitions to address the roots of our biodiversity crisis. It requires bold targets and actions. Many SIDS have already taken the leap, committing to net zero emissions by 2050, designating vast areas of territorial seas and land as protected areas, and banding together with others in initiatives such as the 30 by 30 campaign and the Clean Seas. Actions alone will not suffice. Achieving transformative united actions at a global scale. We need a coalition of the willing to combat climate change, to change unsustainable production patterns, and to stop the proliferation of pollutants. We also need the coalition to also actively ensure that nature is conserved, it is restored, and sustainably used. Together, we must prepare to transition whole of societies and economies in a just and equitable manner to achieve 1.5 degrees Celsius. Human-induced climate change is destroying the delicate nature balance in the myriad of unique ecosystems worldwide. As the planet continues to warm at a record rate, we stand to lose entire ecosystems, changing life as we know it. Together, we must enable the transition to sustainable consumption and production patterns. Over 18 million acres of forests are destroyed each year for land use, and overfishing and overharvesting have already contributed to the extinction of numerous in our lifetime. We cannot afford to continue these practices, which are exhausting finite planetary resources and causing irrecoverable environmental degradation. Together, we must commit to work across sectors and stakeholders to transition away from dangerous pollutants and take steps to improve waste management. Dangerous chemicals released into the environment during manufacturing processes, combined with poor waste management, lead to the exponential increase of pollution levels. Each year, over 8.8 million metric tons of plastic waste is dumped into the ocean, which not only destroys wildlife, but also affects human health. As we advocate for a decade of global ambition, our actions must address all of these interlinked issues in a holistic way. We need renewed focus on meeting our target of carbon neutrality by 2050 under the Paris Agreement. To deter companies and corporations from engaging in unsustainable practices and afford more protection to our natural environment. We need to find ways to make more efficient use of resources and generate less pollution and less waste. The 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development provides an overarching international framework ready-made to address all of these interconnected issues. Progress made across any one goal reinforces the other, and this progress would only be possible with the joint enhanced effort of governments, private sector, civil society, and academia. As we near the end of the strategic plan for biodiversity this year, it is vital that we devise a more ambitious post-2020 global biodiversity framework. We have 10 years of experience to draw on, combined with over 10 years of experience with our global development agenda. We need to align the 2030 action targets with the 2030 agenda, and through both frameworks, halt the net loss of biodiversity by 2030. I believe this is also necessary to prevent future global crises like the one we are facing today. We must protect biodiversity, not only for the future of the planet, but also for the future of humanity. I thank you.
I thank the distinguished minister from Belize, and it's now my pleasure to introduce to you His Excellency Lee White, Minister of Forests, Sea and Environment and Climate Plan of Gabon.
Thank you, Chair. Excellencies, Ministers, on this International Day for Biological Diversity, we come together to take note of what has been an extraordinary and actually quite catastrophic start to 2020, with devastating bushfires in Australia, the warmest January on record, and the sudden quick spread of COVID-19, a pandemic linked to our exploitation of wildlife, and in particular to the unnatural, intimate meeting of a pangolin and a bat in a so-called wet market. Biodiversity is the foundation of human health and well-being, but also of our economies, and we must jointly act to preserve it for ourselves and for future generations. The Global Assessment Report demonstrated that we are experiencing a human-induced mass extinction event. We are facing a biodiversity crisis. Over 75% of the Earth's land surface has been significantly altered by human activities. 2/3 of the ocean is experiencing increasing cumulative impacts. Over 85% of wetlands have been lost. About 1 million species are threatened with extinction. Experts warn that by 2100, climate change could result in the loss of more than half of Africa's bird and mammal species, 20 to 30% decline in the productivity of our lakes, and a significant loss of plant species. A paper published today in the journal Science, which I am one of many co-authors, demonstrates that the rainforests of the Congo Basin are much more resilient to global warming than the Amazon. So things, tragically, are likely to be even worse in South America. The strong interrelationship between climate change, the loss of biodiversity, and human well-being can no longer be ignored. We must rethink our relationship with nature and restore the balance between human activities and the protection of our natural world. We must act now and commit to the recovery of nature. Gabon, therefore, considered it a priority to ensure that the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework includes targets which will, 1, deliver concrete solutions to climate change, including through the integration of measures aimed at reducing its impact on biodiversity, as well as promoting nature-based solutions for adaptation and mitigation. 2, protect human populations against the recurrence of zoonoses by ensuring a balance between use and preservation of nature. 3, achieve zero loss of intact ecosystems and prompt restoration of altered ecosystems. 4, significantly reduce pollution in all its forms, with a special focus on the need to protect the world's oceans from the harmful impacts of plastics, acidification, and mechanical noise. 5, integrate nature into urban planning to make the built environment more biodiversity rich and more human friendly. Green cities are healthy, happy cities. 6, expand protected areas to 30% of land and sea by 2030. 7, halt the decline and allow the recovery of populations of threatened species. 8, integrate natural capital accounting into global development strategies. 9, end illegal harvesting and trade of wild species and ensure that all harvesting, trade and use of wild species is sustainable, effectively regulated, legal and safe for human health. Finally, promote biodiversity science as the foundation of knowledge and innovation. Let us reverse the decline of wild species and focus on their recovery. Let us ensure that protected areas, the cornerstone of biodiversity conservation, are used to the fullest extent possible and are extended to cover 30% of the Earth's land and sea by 2030. Let us work together to promote nature-based solutions, and let us be bold together and fiercely defend the preservation of our natural resources. Thank you.
I thank the distinguished minister from Gabon for his statement, and it's now a great pleasure to introduce His Excellency Vice Minister of Strategic Development of Natural Resources, Ministry of Environment of Peru. You have the floor.
Participants, this is an honor for me on behalf of the Peruvian government to send you the warmest regards on this special day, in which we recall the fundamental role of nature in ensuring the viability of human life on Earth. We must be extremely concerned that the very year in which we were supposed to renew our commitments to biological diversity conservation, almost 3 billion people around the world are in lockdown due to a pandemic that has been generated by a dysfunctional relationship with nature. Today, there is no doubt that the origin and rapid expansion of COVID-19 pandemic has environmental determinants such as the degradation of ecosystems, land and water pollution, and overexploitation and abuse of wild animals and plants, as identified in the IPBES report published last year. For this reason, today more than ever, we need a long-term transformation, a transformation that makes the use of biodiversity goods and services based on the principle of sustainability and mutual respect, to ensure that the promise of development becomes true, not only for us, but for generations to come. During the last months, our distancing from nature has generated images from all over the world of unusually clean skies, rivers and seas, and wildlife recovering spaces from which we had expelled them before. Nature has taken breath and has shown its resilience and capacity to come back. This is good news, but once the pandemic is over, we must not return, I repeat, not return to the previous normality, since that normality was the very cause of the problem. As stated in this year's special theme, we are convinced that real and lasting solutions to this and other serious environmental problems are precisely in nature, and for that reason, we must ensure functional ecosystems, healthy animals and plants, and human populations with more sustainable consumption habits. Due to its mega diverse condition, Peru is a country where nature has always been a challenging partner, which has forced men to display the best of their ability and creativity to build a culture that was able to flourish within the limits of nature. Somewhere in time, we lost that capacity, but current times demand us to find it again. In such regard, the government of Peru reaffirms its commitment to the following: work to stop the net loss of degradation of ecosystem, including pollution of seas and rivers, and seek innovative measures to reduce and mitigate the impacts on biodiversity caused by climate change. The establishment and consolidation of protected areas and OMEX will be fundamental in the achievement of these objectives. Restore degraded terrestrial, marine, and freshwater ecosystem, with emphasis on those that provide the biggest contribution to human well-being. Join efforts to eradicate overexploitation and illegal trade in wild species and to avoid genetic erosion of native species and their wild relatives, focusing on research, development, and innovation, and on generating information for better decision-making. Increase the benefits provided by biodiversity by promoting responsible private investment in bio and eco businesses, and strengthening the role and participation of indigenous peoples and local communities in those ventures. Guarantee a fair and equitable distribution of benefits for indigenous peoples and local communities, protectors of our natural heritage, but also direct victims of the consequences of its degradation. Mainstream the green infrastructure approach, which seeks to incorporate ecosystem as part of the tools used to solve major development challenges, such as the provision of clean water, coastal erosion, or disaster risk reduction. And through that, reconnect urban spaces and their inhabitants with their remaining natural surroundings. Promote the deployment of increased public and private finance aimed at ecosystem conservation and sustainable use, using mechanisms such as payments for ecosystem services. Promote the adoption of renewable energy, the reduction of the use of plastics and other pollutants, and the adoption of technologies in production systems that have less impact on the environment and biodiversity. This is a crucial time. It is time for us to renew our partnership with nature. It is time for us to understand that long-lasting human well-being is not and will not be possible without nature's involvement. It is not late yet. There is still hope. Let's work together to rebuild our relationship with nature and in the process, ensure our survival in the long term. Thank you very much for your attention and a great Global Biodiversity Day for all.
Thank you very much to the Vice Minister of Peru. I would now like to introduce Her Excellency, Mrs. Brune Poisson, Secretary of State to the Minister of the Ecological and Inclusive Transition of France. You have the floor, Madam. Do we have the Secretary of State of France with us?
The minister is connected. There seems to be a sound challenge. She is there, but there's a sound challenge.
Thank you. Can we have that resolved, or would you like to that we move on to the next and we take you in afterwards?
Yes, with apologies to all. I think we will go to the next speaker. Minister, we will try to work on your sound connections right now. Thank you.
Okay.
Hello? I can't. It's my turn, but I can't hear. Hello? Can you hear me?
We can hear you. You have already been introduced. So please have the floor. Minister from Kenya.
Yes. Thank you, Madam Moderator, Kenya joins the rest of the world in celebrating this year's International Day of Biodiversity with its appropriate theme, Our Solutions Are in Nature, in view of the current global crisis caused by COVID-19. Madam Moderator, biodiversity, we believe biodiversity has a fundamental and critical value to human well-being and health in terms of culture, economics, and environmental needs. It provides a functioning ecosystem that supplies food, medicine, fiber, oxygen, clean air, and water. Our constitution here in Kenya and our vision 2030 recognizes the vital role of biodiversity as foundation and enabler towards attainment of sustainable development. However, we recognize that these vital resources continue to face unprecedented challenges that are leading to biodiversity loss, habitat, and fragmentation, degradation, and pollution. Here in Kenya, we have suffered, like many other countries, from mass landslides, floods, habitat loss, and new zoonotic diseases. We, however, believe that together, as international community, we can save the planet by using nature-based solutions and green recovery interventions to tackle and address the nature-based disasters. Here in Kenya, hello, can you hear me? The strategic plan and the achieve as follows. We continue to strengthen our policy and structures to support local and county and national efforts to conserve biodiversity. We have integrated biodiversity planning and business development strategies. We have implemented several ecosystem restoration programs, such as rehabilitation of our forest complex, rehabilitation of water towers, rehabilitation of the Tana catchment, among others. The government has also set us a very ambitious target of planting 2 billion trees by the year 2022. Madam Moderator, we call on all the actors and international community during the ongoing negotiations for the development of post-2020 biodiversity framework that should be built on the lessons learned from the implementation of the biodiversity 2021-2020 framework to ensure that a much more ambitious implementation plan. Without implementation, these plans, Madam Speaker, will be of no use, and we urge that we must bring everybody on board. We not only reach an agreement, but we also make sure that agreement is implemented. Madam Speaker, we assure the rest of Kenya will support all innovative nature-based solutions to save our planet. Thank you, and World Biodiversity Day under lockdown.
Thank you so much, and thank you for your greetings. I will turn back the floor to Mrs. Brun-Poirson, Secretary of State to the Minister of Ecological and Inclusive Transition of France.
The minister should approach her microphone more closely. That should work for her. Thank you.
Hello? Everybody's fine. Just go ahead.
The minister can go ahead. Please just raise your voice and that should connect.
More crucial than ever.
I'm very sorry to interrupt, but we still have difficulties in hearing the Secretary of State.
On the line?
Sorry to interrupt. The person who has the phone in France should go closer to the minister, please. We can hear the person typing, but it's not close enough from the minister.
Allô?
Oui, nous pouvons vous entendre avec ce micro.
Ah, je sais pas, c'est très étrange, c'est la première fois que j'ai ce genre de problème, excusez-moi, I'm so sorry. All my apologies, this is really driving me crazy. I mean, France is the only nation who is unable to actually connect, so I really want to apologize, I'm so sorry. Anyway, I was just saying that science is very clear that the COVID-19 pandemic is actually, it can be understood as a biodiversity crisis. And I would like to stress this. This is not a new phenomenon. It is only yet another reminder of the crisis that we are undergoing. I know this is a pretty blunt introduction, but I think we can't afford to waste any more time. 2020 was supposed to be a year for biodiversity. And if 2020 is the year where we collectively acknowledge the human and nature relationship crisis, 2021 must be the year where we act collectively and boldly. And it's not too late. We know we have the upcoming COP15, which will be a key milestone for enhanced ambition. France supports ambitious and operational targets and objectives, resource mobilization, and a robust implementation framework to ensure that biodiversity loss comes to a halt by 2030. Some of you may know that France has been supporting the target to protect 30% of land and oceans by 2030. We're very pleased because this is also a target that the EU has just made heard or has adopted. And really encourage all the countries that can commit to that to join the high-level ambitious coalition for nature and people that France and Costa Rica are co-chairing. Our objective is really to gather a critical mass of countries to ensure the adoption of the 30% target in the negotiations. And I would like again to thank very dearly and very warmly His Excellency Carlos Manuel Rodriguez for all the support and all the time he spent trying to push this coalition. And I'm pretty sure that we can, and that we will be able to achieve a lot through that sort of pioneering countries coalition. one of the things also that I think we should all push for, and this is something that France is actively pushing for, is this idea that investing in nature, this idea that there is only one health. I know a lot of you are very familiar with it, so I'm not going to go through that in detail, especially because the sound is bad. But I just want to stress the fact that France is fully behind it. What we're also working on, President Macron announced the World Biodiversity Congress, which will take place, the IUCN Congress, which will take place in Marseille in January 11, where we want to use that event, that critical event, to prepare for and set the ambitious ground for the COP15. We also want to use this opportunity to bring businesses along, because we feel that more than ever they should take part and act strongly in favor of biodiversity. This is also one of the reasons that I'm going to include on that we believe that first COVID-19 biodiversity. I think now the crisis, and I'm not going to talk about the coronavirus crisis as an opportunity, but it is clearly one very difficult moment that should help us and give us really the occasion to push for further biodiversity preservation and put it as high on the agenda as what we've just done with climate. Although it's never enough, I think we need to keep going. Thank you very much for this opportunity. Sorry again for the technical problems. And I look forward to seeing you all and keep working like that virtually. So it's tremendously helpful. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Also, I'm sorry for the technical problem. It was a little difficult to hear you, but thank you for your statement. I now would like to introduce, as a little bit of a last-minute change, but it's even a greater pleasure to introduce His Excellency Mr. Shu Hong, Representative of Minister of Ecology and Environment and Director General of the Department of Nature and Ecology, Conservation of the Ministry of Ecology and Environment of China. Mr. Shu Hong is representing the Vice Minister of the Ministry of Ecology and Environment and the incoming President of the COP15. You have the floor, sir.
各位，没声音啊！各位嘉宾、女士们、先生们，大家好！我谨代表中国生态环境部。
Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, good morning. On behalf of the Ministry of Ecology and Environment of China, I would like to thank the government of Norway for organizing this special high-level event online. I have the honor to speak on behalf of the incoming presidency of COP15. China has just had various publicity activities and events on biodiversity. Happy International Day for Biodiversity. The event today is much needed as it focuses on discussion and exchange of views on boosting confidence globally to protect the biodiversity. Just now, all the distinguished guests shared their wonderful insights. Your excellent work has laid a solid foundation for COP15 and the adoption of the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework. At present, biodiversity, the foundation for human survival and development, is facing severe challenges. Loss of species and destruction of habitats have not been curbed. China is willing to work with countries around the world to make unremitting efforts in tackling these challenges. Guided by Xi Jinping's thought on ecological civilization, we adhere to the principle of innovative, coordinated, green, open, and shared development. The concept of respecting, accommodating to, and protecting nature and adhere to the principle of advocating harmonious coexistence between humans and nature, and the conviction that lasted waters and large mountains are invaluable assets. Great efforts have been made to promote the building of ecological civilization and a community of shared life. Remarkable progress has been achieved. China has met the Aichi biodiversity target in terms of the percentage of terrestrial protected areas ahead of schedule. All types, covering more than 170 million hectares, which accounts for 18% of the whole land territory. Over 25 territory have been preliminarily marked as ecological conservation redline areas, covering habitats of important species in key areas for biodiversity. The amount of carbon absorbed in these areas accounts for nearly 40% of the national total. Ladies and gentlemen, despite all the critical challenges, we're moving towards the right direction. In 2018, Egypt, China, and the CBD Secretariat launched the Sharm el-Sheikh to Kunming Action Agenda for Nature and People, which calls on all stakeholders to submit actions and commitments. China and France issued Beijing Call for Biodiversity Conservation and Climate Change to strengthen cooperation on the two issues. Up to now, negotiations on the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework have been progressing well. Bearing in mind the three objectives of the Convention, parties are getting closer to a set of goals and targets that are reasonable and acceptable to all. We need to carry on with this work, identify innovative mechanisms for implementation and financing, so as to provide concrete and reliable support to global biodiversity actions in the next decade. As the host country of COP15, China will fulfill its obligations and work with the international community to build a shared future for all life on Earth, where man and nature coexist in harmony. I believe that in the near future, we will be able to gather together physically and witness a successful and fruitful COP as a result of our joint efforts in making it another milestone in the history of the Convention. Thank you.
I thank His Excellency Mr. Xu Hang, the incoming President of COP15, for his statement. I would now, we have come to the end of this segment, and I would very much like to thank all the participants for sharing your reflections. It has clearly demonstrated that our collective resolve this very important agenda is really there, and I think there have been so many good statement made and so many ideas, so many visions put forward that that we should be trying to collect as much as we can. So I would encourage you to all of you to put your statement on our web page so that it's accessible to more people, and we will be able to even look more closely into to what you have stated today. I will now turn over the meeting to His Excellency, my good friend Rodrigo Carazo, Permanent Representative of Costa Rica to the UN. He will moderate the interactive discussion with the title Bringing Science and Politics to Build Back Better. Rodrigo, you have the floor. Thank you so much.
Ambassador Mona Jewel, it's always a pleasure for Costa Rica to work with Norway, to work with you in these purposes of fostering a better environment and much needed biodiversity. Well, for this segment, the organizers have structured several questions that will be put forth to the participants so that their compact responses would give us at the end of the panel an ample perspective of the issues which we are discussing. So without further ado, and saluting all the participants. I will first begin with Dr. Anne Larigauderie, Executive Secretary of the Intergovernmental Platform on Biodiversity and Ecosystem Services. Dr. Larigauderie, even before the current pandemic, the world knew already that we needed enhanced ambitions for protecting biodiversity. As we continue the negotiations of the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework, how can we raise those ambitions for biodiversity, please?
Thank you, Ambassador, for the question, and greetings to all. So the IBES Global Assessment of Biodiversity and Ecosystem Services, which has been cited by many speakers today, concluded a year ago that it is very likely that most of the Aichi biodiversity targets will be missed based on scientific findings, and also that if we continue on our current negative biodiversity trends, we are also on our path to miss many of the Sustainable Development Goals. So to address your question, Ambassador, we can raise ambitions for biodiversity by bringing awareness about biodiversity in all economic sectors beyond the environmental sectors. We can raise ambition for biodiversity by integrating biodiversity in all sectors of activity, again, beyond the environmental sector. So let me take three very quick examples to illustrate this: health, food, and climate change. So thinking about health, of course, a very timely and major topic. The IBES Global Assessment report showed that 70% of all emerging diseases affecting people originate from wildlife and domesticated animals, and also that the emergence of new diseases can be exacerbated by human activities, including land clearing, deforestation, as well as habitat fragmentation. So it is really key to bring together these two sectors, being forestry and health, public health sectors in particular. So coming to my second example, food now, the IBES Global Assessment report showed that more than 75% of all food crop types rely on animal pollinators, 75%. And this represents a market of between 230 and 600 billion US dollars of crops produced annually thanks to our pollinators. But beyond pollinators, and still relating to food, biodiversity is the basis for sustainable food systems. If we want to feed the world in a manner, we need to promote, in particular, agroecological practices, which are going to allow us to produce food on the long term, while also preserving the quality of our soils, of our rivers, of our air, noting that in so doing, we would also have additional benefits such as healthier diets and so better human health altogether. So again, here, the conclusion of this example is that it is key to integrate biodiversity to the agriculture sector in this particular example. And last, in relation with climate, now we know that terrestrial ecosystems can absorb currently about a third of all of the annual emissions of carbon on an annual basis. And they could do more if our environments were better restored and protected. However, the IBES Global Assessment also showed that large-scale deployment of bioenergy plantations, including monocultures that are envisaged in many parts of the world, would threaten biodiversity and food security. So we see here that biodiversity represents an important solution to climate change mitigation and should be protected rather than replaced by bioenergy crops, which could exacerbate the problem of climate change and also cause issues with food security. So here again, it really is critical to bring together the issue of biodiversity, this time with climate change. In these two issues, biodiversity and climate change, as mentioned by earlier speakers, are fundamentally interconnected. So that really closes my short response to your very important question. And to conclude, I would just say that in 2020, then now let us really work together to make a difference by integrating biodiversity in all of these economic sectors. Thank you.
Existing among the concepts and among the meetings. Thank you very much, Dr. Lagauderie. And now to our dear colleague, chargé d'affaires of the Philippines, Kira Azucena. Will you please, Ms. Azucena, could you share the perspective of the Philippines regarding the importance of the post-2020 global diversity framework, and tell us how can the world better promote the protection of biodiversity during this UN decade on biodiversity? Yeah. I have the floor, dear colleague.
Thank you so much, Ambassador, and good morning, everyone. First of all, let me say that as a mega diverse country, the Philippines is proud to be part of this important high-level discussion to commemorate the International Day for Biological. Before I proceed to answer the questions, Mr. Ambassador, I would just like to provide a brief background of the situation in my country. The Philippine Biodiversity Strategy and Action Plan 2015 to 2028 is our roadmap to conserve our rich and unique biodiversity. Its vision is to have, by 2028, a biodiversity that is restored and rehabilitated, valued, effectively managed, and secured, maintaining ecosystem services to sustain healthy, resilient Filipino communities, and delivering benefits to all. Pursuant to this roadmap, we have achieved concrete milestones. Among these are, and I will mention 4, 1, the enactment of a law that expands our protected areas and mobilizes government resources to conserve and protect ecologically rich and unique areas. 2, the successful establishment of area-based conservation measures with the active engagement and support of local government agencies. 3, the establishment of safeguards in the implementation of infrastructure projects in protected areas to eliminate or minimize the risk of biodiversity loss. And 4, legislation that mandates all government agencies to integrate biodiversity into their development plans and programs, providing the policy environment for mainstreaming biodiversity across sectors. Now, addressing the questions, to ensure that the post-2020 global biodiversity framework contributes to the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development, we wish to highlight the inclusion of the following crucial elements, and I mentioned 5. First, the obligation to maintain existing ecosystems, forests, coastal and marine, wetlands and agro-ecosystems, and to keep them intact, or at least maintain their viability against human encroachment and developmental activities. This obligation comes in addition to expanding the coverage of these ecosystems through aggressive restoration and rehabilitation activities to prevent the spillover of zoonotic diseases, including their carriers, into human settlements, peri-urban areas, and urban areas. Second, the need to focus on coral reef areas, recognizing the unique vulnerability of coral reefs to anthropogenic impacts, including global threats from climate change and ocean acidification, as well as local impacts such as the inputs of nutrients and sediments from agriculture, including from land-based and sea-based pollutions, overfishing, and destructive fishing practices. Third, the need to intensify measures in addressing habitat destruction, illegal wildlife trade, and climate change. Response to the global pandemic caused by COVID-19, we need to strengthen cooperation and partnerships to end the illegal wildlife trade and halt further degradation of our remaining ecosystems. With forests and coastal and marine areas constantly encroached upon, and wildlife forcibly driven out or taken out of their natural habitats, the threat of zoonotic diseases will continue to loom over us. Fourth, urgency to implement and support efforts to mainstream biodiversity across the production landscapes and extractive resource sectors. This will pave the way for more nature-based solutions in ensuring that drivers to biodiversity are addressed. Increasing initiatives related to biodiversity-friendly activities in businesses, infrastructures, agriculture, mining, and energy are good barometers of achieving our conservation and sustainable development goals. And fifth and last, to build back better and prevent the recurrence of virulent pandemics. This can be done by, among others, strengthening surveillance systems through centralized GIS mapping, deployment of new technologies, broadening research and intensifying information drives, and improving public health systems. I wish to share that the Association of Southeast Asian Nations, or ASEAN, has already submitted its initial inputs to the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework. In our regional consultations, it was underlined that biodiversity is where we get our food, ingredients for medicine, materials for clothing and shelter, and raw materials for businesses and industries. Biodiversity is interconnected with all development sectors. To conclude, Mr. Ambassador, ladies and gentlemen, as we mark International Day for Biological Diversity, we remind humanity that our solutions are in nature. We continue to work on our ambitions for the planet, but we also do not forget we are accountable for every action we take. Thank you for your attention.
Mr. Marco Lambertini is the Director General of the World Wildlife Fund International, to whom we ask, Mr. Lambertini, what is the perspective on the process of the post-2020 Global Diversity Framework? Are we doing enough to hold and to reverse the biodiversity loss? What could we do more? Please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ambassador, and I'm delighted to be part of this conversation. And excellencies and colleagues and friends who all are concerned about the future of the planet and our society, we are truly living extraordinary times. And this is not simply because of the COVID-19 tragic crisis, but in fact, this is the symptom of a much, much more serious situation. On one hand, we know that all the indicators of the health of the planet are still going in the wrong direction. But on the other hand, science has never been clearer, awareness has never been greater, concerns have never been deeper across all sectors of society, and all this brings together a number of elements that makes the perfect condition for change and ambition. We now need the world to embrace an ambitious, concrete, global plan to rebalance our relationship with the planet. And you, Ambassador, referring to your question, we have this opportunity to embrace such a new deal for nature and people, if you like, in 2021. A new deal that should have some key elements around the post-2020 biodiversity framework, but also across other conventions that deal with the issue of sustainability, climate, ocean, and so forth. First element is to be clear on a global apex goal for nature, that a nature-positive global goal that, together with the carbon-neutral global goal for climate, commits us to stop losing nature and begin restoration and recovery by 2030 on an ambitious baseline that could be 2020. The second element should be a set of clear, measurable, specific targets and goals that had to do with three main challenges that actually were already mentioned in the previous speeches. First of all, we have lost already half of the natural spaces and ecosystem on the planet. We need to protect what's remaining. And so 30% of land and ocean protected, and the remaining 20% sustainably managed, with emphasis on community and indigenous-led conservation, and of course, an agenda of restoration as well. Second, we need to halt the today's mass extinction and wildlife sharp decline by addressing unsustainable hunting, fishing, and the wildlife trade is also at the root of the pandemic of today. And thirdly, but equally important, in fact, perhaps the most challenging of all, is to reduce human footprint on nature by focusing on the key economic drivers today, root causes of nature loss. We call it the big five: agriculture, fishing, extractives, infrastructure, and forestry. And of course, alongside clean energy. And greening these sectors, it's not only possible, we know how to do that. It requires political will and corporate determination to shift financial flows in the direction of sustainable practices. And as I said, it's not only possible, and we know what that means, but also we know that will generate immense economic growth and jobs opportunities. So, Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen and friends, this is all necessary, it's urgent, and frankly, we know it's also possible. It's also right for the future of our children, the children of the world, and all life on Earth. We can, we must, and we will agree on an ambitious plan next year. It's an unmissable opportunity. It's our responsibility. And together with an amazing group of people around this call and beyond, they already are gathering around this ambition. We in WWF are very excited and confident that we can do it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Lambertini. Thank you very much. And as the last panelist, I am very glad to present Ms. Inka Nitke, who is the head of the Division of International Cooperation and Biodiversity, and is also the CBD National Focal Point in Germany, to whom we ask the question about what the Secretary General of the United Nations has suggested in terms of that any economic and social reconstruction after COVID-19 needs to build back better, as has been said today several times. What are some of the ways in which an ambitious biodiversity agenda can meet this challenge, Ms. Nitke?
Thank you, Ambassador Carosa. Dear Excellencies, thanks for this opportunity to represent Germany here today. Yes, we need to build better. Prime Minister Svenja Schulze has been very vocal on this already. For example, in her press conference in the beginning of April, in which she stated very clear that committed nature conservation is key to prevent new emerging diseases. And therefore we need to act, all of us and together. We have to understand the causes of the crisis and to listen to science on this. Therefore, we very much appreciate the work on IPBES is doing on this topic now. But we also look on CBD, and the 2050 vision of the CBD will guide us the way to build back better, as it's living in harmony with nature. And we need to live sustainable. So how could we phrase it better with nature? We need to conserve biodiversity, and we need to be sustainable. Therefore, we need sustainable agriculture, we need sustainable forestry, we need sustainable fisheries, and we also need sustainable supply chain. But how to do things? We can start looking at small and tiny things, like insects. And also, that was an issue where we learned a lot from science as well. as science told us 2 years ago that the insect decline is massive in Germany. And therefore, the German government adopted last year an action program for insect protections, which spells out several number of actions to protect and restore biodiversity with a view to protect insects, but withhold biodiversity will take profit out of it. The European Commission published just the other day a EU Biodiversity Strategy 2030 and a Farm to Fork Strategy, both of them also including actions to protect and sustainable use biodiversity. And we also need to protect wildlife and species. But we also have to look on bigger things. Like IPBES told us last year, as we heard earlier, that in the global assessment for biodiversity and ecosystem services, what we need to do, as biodiversity is globally in a big threat. And that's what we need to do next year together, is to adapt a new global framework for biodiversity, which leads us the way how to build better for biodiversity. This framework is therefore not only a framework post-2020, it also needs to be a framework for biodiversity post-COVID-19. This global framework needs to show that we have learned from this crisis. It needs to spell out how to live in harmony with nature, and it needs to give us a direction through long-term goals. It needs to set action through target actions. And these actions need to be commensurate with the challenges. The challenges IPBES global assessment last year has spelled out, and the challenges the COVID-19 crisis is teaching us. The sum of these actions need to have a transformative and transformational impact, both in protecting nature, but also in using biodiversity sustainable. And the post-2020 framework also needs to be a toolkit on how to implement it. What are our implementation vehicles? How to review our implementation and how to accelerate action? And how do we cooperate jointly and work together in the implementation? As it is very clear, we have to work together on international biodiversity, as our solutions are in nature, but they are also international. So have a nice International Day for Biological Diversity. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Ms. Nitke. And the organizers and myself will definitely thank very much our panelists today for their insightful and very interesting remarks on a large range of subjects. And now, being only 6 minutes late, we will give the floor to distinguished participants who have registered, asking them to limit their interventions, please, to 3 minutes, so we'll have time for everyone. Please, Mr. Silvio Gonzalo, who is Deputy Head of the Delegation of the European Union to the United Nations in New York. Mr. Gonzalo, please.
Thank you, Ambassador Carasso, and thank you also, Ambassador Yu, for organizing this event. This year's International Biodiversity Day is a special one for the EU. Just 2 days ago, the EU presented the new EU Biodiversity Strategy towards 2030. The strategy is an ambitious action plan and part of the implementation of the European Green Deal. It proposes new targets for the EU. It aims at setting aside as protected areas at least 30% of the land and sea in Europe, and to restore degraded ecosystems at land and sea across Europe. It wants to unlock 20 billion euro per year for biodiversity through various sources. EU, national, and private. But our strategy, and this is what is important to say today, looks beyond the boundaries of Europe. It sets our ambition for cooperation with our partners worldwide, in the CBD context and beyond, in support to developing countries. With this strategy, the EU wants to position itself in a leading position in the global fight for biodiversity. There couldn't be a better timing for a new strategy. In the middle of a disastrous pandemic, we're all looking for ways to come out of this crisis stronger and more resilient, not only to prevent future pandemics, but also to find new ways to create jobs and to see our economies grow in a more sustainable way. To achieve this, and the theme of this year's International Biodiversity Day catches it well, solutions can be found in nature. And we should not forget that nature protection is also a health issue for the prevention of zoonotic diseases, but also much more broadly for our mental health and well-being. In addition, there is a strong climate case for nature, and many of the speakers said it, particularly in the case of climate change mitigation and adaptation. And there is a clear-cut business case that speaks for nature protection. Half of the world's GDP is linked to nature, and in the EU, a quarter of jobs in tourism have links to protected areas. Inaction has cost us trillions per year in lost ecosystem services. In sum, as our strategy says, there is an urgent moral, economic, and environmental imperative to protect, restore, and sustainably use nature. Your last panel today was about science-based policymaking. I'd like to welcome that. Never has this issue been as important as during the COVID-19 crisis. It is key that our policies are anchored in accurate science-based analysis and recommendations. Colleagues, we have important milestones ahead of us where our leaders can turn the tide. The September UN Summit will be the first time in 10 years that heads of state and government address the topic. It is a unique opportunity to put nature on the top of the international agenda, and we should not miss it. We think that we should use this occasion to create a global movement for nature in the context of the preparations of the next COP next year, and for an ambitious post-2020 global biodiversity framework. Today, we also think that we should do this together with everyone, with businesses, banks, civil society, indigenous people, youth, and all citizens on the ground. And we also think that we should approach these issues in an integrated way. As some of the previous speakers put it, climate, biodiversity, health, and sustainable production and consumption are closely interrelated and should be tackled in a coherent way. Thank you for giving me the floor, and thank you for this excellent initiative.
Thank you very much, Mr. Gonzalo. And now I will give the floor to my dear friend and colleague, Mohamed Siad Douale, le représentant permanent de Djibouti. S'il vous plaît. Mohamed Siad, is he available? Is there a connection with him? Hello? Can you hear me, Mona? Yes, good. So I'm in, and perhaps if we can connect to our colleague Mohamed Siad, and I will continue by giving the floor to another esteemed colleague with whom many things are done and worked in the terms of environmental protection. Her Excellency Ms. Darja Babdas Kuret, who is the permanent representative of the Republic of Slovenia. Please, Darja.
Thank you, Rodrigo. Thank you to organizers of this event. Indeed, it's becoming more and more important and vital for us to discuss these issues as much as possible and to deliver on them. Well, let me start by saying that Slovenia is among the regions with the above average of biodiversity. with 26,000 known species, and biodiversity has been successfully mainstreamed in our national programs, our national plans, and even strategies. The National Development Strategy that we launched in 2014, we addressed the preservation of countries' natural capital through investment in green infrastructure. In the European Union, the network of Natura 2000 became a major mechanism for biodiversity conservation. And 37% of Slovenia territory is already a part of Natura 2000. One of the main measures taken for the conservation of biodiversity in Slovenia relates to sustainable use of resources, to introduction of circular economy, and of course implementation of SDG 12, sustainable consumption and production. Slovenia also recently joined the EU Initiative 16 for greening the economy after the COVID-19. The initiative puts the European Green Deal at the heart of the Europe economic recovery. And of course, we also joined the 2 days ago launched strategy on biodiversity of the European Union. But let me say that Slovenia in its own has its own merit. A few years ago, we started the process of awareness of bees for our environment and also for biodiversity. And in 2017, together with all the members of the United Nations, we proclaimed the World Bee Day. Just 2 days ago, we celebrated that World Bee Day, but it was a day of awareness of importance of bees for the nature. And let me also say that we all know how the bees important are, but still it is always necessary to raise awareness and to do. Global challenges such as the unprecedented loss of biodiversity that we are facing, climate change, and the spread of devastating pandemics stress the urgency of reconsidering our relation with the nature. We need rapid action and at all levels and all stakeholders in order to realize 2050 vision for biodiversity, living in harmony with nature. And last but not least, let me say that we have the opportunity in September for the Leaders Summit on Biodiversity to demonstrate the ambition of accelerating action on biodiversity for sustainable development. The summit should stress the need for urgent action and create a strong political momentum for engagement of whole societies. And thank you once again, and happy Biodiversity Day.
Thank you very much, esteemed colleague. And now I give the floor to Mr. Ali Kaba, who is the permanent representative of Sierra Leone to the United Nations. Please, Ali, you have the floor. Ali, are you there? Well, let's try to locate him. If not, I will get back to him. And meanwhile, I will give the floor to my compatriot from El Salvador, the permanent ambassador, Egriselda González López. Por favor, Egri.
Thank you so much, Ambassador. Gracias. Thank you so much to all the panelists for the important remarks and to the organizers for convening this e-meeting to commemorate the International Day for Biological Diversity. Well, COVID-19 has posed an unprecedented challenge for the world, but it has also shown the importance of solidarity within and among nations to face the virus. We believe that these contexts provide us the opportunity to reflect on our own development patterns and the need to reverse negative trends. And most importantly, to promote the inclusion of nature and climate in all response and recoveries. In this sense, we support the call to raise the ambitions of the CBD framework. This process should be done in an inclusive manner, listening the recommendation of different stakeholders to have a comprehensive outcome. Biodiversity is an issue that deserves a special attention from all peoples and countries. We recognize the importance of its protection and conservation. El Salvador, my country, is located in one of the richest areas of biodiversity in the world. Currently, my country has 6 ecoregions with diverse tropical ecosystems. Towards its protection, such as the National Strategy for Biological Diversity. Although biodiversity is an important asset for the quality of life of our population and for our current and future development, we face urgent challenges. In this sense, El Salvador has begun a process of restoration and inclusive conservation of our ecosystem throughout the territory in order to regain its stability to support development, which involves the use of soil. The National Biodiversity Strategy represents a major challenge that requires combining multiple resources, knowledge, skills, and organization, as well individual and collective arrangements to create and enable conditions that lead the country to a new level of capabilities. Also, we would like to recall that last year, the United Nations General Assembly adopted the UN Decade of Ecosystem Restoration 2021-2030. Knowing that ecosystem restoration is understood as assisting the recovery of degraded, damaged, and destroyed ecosystem to regain ecological functionality and provide the goods and services that people value. It is our hope that this, among other initiatives, will provide the foundations for coordinated efforts towards the restoration of our ecosystems. I thank you. Muchas gracias.
Gracias, dear Ambassador. And now we give the floor to Ambassador Tom Woodruff, who is the representative of the permanent mission of the United Kingdom to ECOSOC. Will you please, Ambassador?
Thank you very much, Ambassador, and thank you and Ambassador Jewell for convening today's meeting and such a distinguished and high-level panel of experts on this important day today. And it's been a really fascinating and thought-provoking discussion, and such a timely one, I think, in the current context as well. As many of the speakers have said this morning, once the immediate COVID-19 crisis has passed, our societies and economies will need to rebuild in new and better ways. The links between biodiversity loss and climate are clear, and we must put accelerated action on both at the heart of this response, and to recover better in ways that are clean, green, healthy, and more resilient. So as hosts of COP26 with our partners Italy, the UK will bring countries together to look at innovative ways to address climate change and biodiversity loss in a linked manner. This will include scaling up private and public finance for nature-based solutions that support livelihoods, strengthen resilience, and deliver carbon savings. And we will continue to work with all involved to increase ambition across mitigation, adaptation, and finance. For our part, the UK government is committed to halting and restoring biodiversity loss. At home, we are bringing forward legislation to restore and enhance nature through the Environment Bill, including by ensuring that land use and new building and planning developments create green spaces and support local wildlife. We have increased our terrestrial and marine protected areas by 124% in the last decade, and we have committed to improve the health of over 90% of our priority marine and freshwater habitats, grasslands, and woodlands. On the wildlife trade, the government is consulting on options to restrict the import and export of hunting trophies to the UK, including a potential ban. We are also bringing forward the toughest ivory ban in Europe and one of the toughest in the world, with some of the strongest enforcement provisions. And with the Global Ocean Alliance, the UK supports an ambitious target to designate at least 30% of global oceans in marine protected areas by 2030. And at the UN General Assembly last year, our Prime Minister announced a new £220 million international biodiversity fund to protect biodiversity and clamp down on the illegal wildlife trade. But as we all know, and as we've heard a lot this morning, biodiversity loss is not just an environmental issue. It also has significant economic repercussions. Indeed, the World Economic Forum's 2020 Global Risks Report ranked biodiversity loss and ecosystem collapse in the top 5 risks globally. For this reason, the UK government has commissioned an independent global review of the economics of biodiversity, which is being led by Professor Siddhartha Dasgupta, the Emeritus Professor of Economics at the University of Cambridge. The review will explore the sustainability of our engagements with nature. It will set out a unified framework for thinking about the economics of biodiversity, and it will present options for change to enhance both biodiversity and our collective wealth and well-being. We look forward to consulting with all of you in the development of this review and sharing its outcomes in due course. The Nature Summit and Convention on Biological Diversity, COP, are of course key milestones going forward. And like others have said today, it is critical, absolutely critical, that we agree an ambitious post-2020 biodiversity framework in Kunming. The UK is committed to making this year and next year a year for climate and biodiversity action, in which we can all build back better together and continue to raise ambition ahead of a successful COP26 in 2021. Thank you very much.
Yes, Tom, we all wish for that very, very successful COP26 and look forward to the process of preparation in which you have been so much involved. Thanks very much for your presentation. And now we give the floor to His Excellency Oshino Toshiya, DPR of the Permanent Mission of Japan. Please, dear colleague.
Thank you, muchas gracias, Ambassador Carasso, and well, thank you very much, Norway, Ambassador Ju, for organizing this very important event. Today's event has been very, very inspiring and informative, and it definitely contributes to raise our awareness and even ambition of biodiversity. And in that regard, Japan is very pleased to join the co-sponsorship and of such a significant event. Well, COVID-19 pandemic is posing a multifaceted human security number of people. Therefore, we must work together to ensure that no one is left behind. In this connection, the building back better, as many of our previous speakers have emphasized, is very important to create a resilient and inclusive society, and this is the way to go. And new normal should include the society where conservation of biodiversity and measures against climate change and the marine plastic litter, for instance, are taken into account more than ever. And the value of living, Japan have a very good record of and have a value. This has been our tradition for many years. And that's why we have a Satoyama initiative, which we advocated and has long been advancing with many partners, could have an additional value as a world leading example for the better future. Japan will advance the Satoyama initiative further, as we believe, in the course of this recovery from the coronavirus crisis. It can make a contribution solving local issues, as well as to achieving the SDGs. Moreover, in climate change mitigation and adaptation, making use of ecosystem-based approaches is going to be more important too. We will push ahead with integration of climate change measures and the conservation of biodiversity. Looking ahead to the post-corona world, I'd like to reconfirm the importance of realizing a virtuous cycle of environment and growth. And 2020 is a significant year when the post-2020 global biodiversity framework will be taking over the Aichi biodiversity targets adopted in Japan. now is a time for us to act in concert with people all over the world to truly achieve the 2050 vision of biodiversity shared in Aichi, which is with nature. Finally, I'd like to inform you that Shinjiro Koizumi, our Minister of Environment, Japan, posted a very powerful message on the IDB website of the CBD Secretariat today, that we must make our society resilient and compatible with the conservation of biodiversity and the measures against climate change. So thank you very much. Muchas gracias for the floor.
Thank you very much, Mr. Hoshino Toshiya, for your presentation, for bringing the post made by your minister. And now I will give the floor to the Ambassador, His Excellency Jyrki Terva of the Permanent Mission of Finland. Will you please? Well, Mr. available. So now, yes, we give the floor to His Excellency Nagaraj Naidu, who is the Deputy Permanent Representative of the Permanent Mission of India. You have the floor, colleague.
Thank you so much, Ambassador Rodrigo. Thank you so much. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, I would first of all like to thank the organizers for today's event and wish everyone a very happy Biological Diversity Day. The structure, ecosystem are resilient only to the extent of the species in that ecosystem. The ecosystem integrity underlines the codependent web of life can collapse within a very short time if its components are eroded one by one. The increasing overlapping of boundaries between humans and wildlife has resulted in new environmental conditions that favor particular hosts and pathogens, and consequently the main drivers for the emergence of zoonotic diseases that today the world is compounded with. Excellencies, India had the privilege of hosting the UN Biodiversity Conference in 2012, the UN Convention to Combat Desertification, September. And earlier in February 2020, we hosted the 13th Conference of Parties to the Convention on Migratory Species, famously called the COP13, to focus on adopting action of migratory species. The COP13 was supposed to kick off the Nature and Biodiversity Super Year for 2020. But 2020, as all of us know, has not been that super that we all thought about. And the only way to build back better is to step up action, to conserve species, to protect ecosystems, and make meaningful progress towards achieving the SDGs. The shared experience of the pandemic should encourage better international collaboration and solidarity for a sustainable future. Excellencies, India, with just 2.4% of the world's land area, contributes to about biodiversity. Conservation of wildlife and habitats has been part of India's cultural ethos, which encourages compassion and coexistence. India has been championing the cause of climate action through conservation, sustainable lifestyle, and green development models. We host a sixth of the planet's population. We also have made India home to 74% of the world's tiger population. All of this has happened purely through focused conservation efforts and respect for flora and fauna. Yesterday, along with UNEP, India launched the initiative called Not All Animals Migrate by Choice. This initiative is aimed at putting an end to illegal trafficking of endangered species and to raise awareness and Excellencies, diversity underpins the health of the planet and has a direct impact on our present and future life. I would end by quoting Mahatma Gandhi, who once said, "The air, the land, and the water are not an inheritance from our forefathers, but on loan from our future generations." So thank you so much.
Thank you. Ending with such a meaningful citation of that great philosopher of the environment and of living in harmony with nature. I take it that the representative of Finland is not at the time with which we would end the list of speakers, and perhaps as a short closing remarks, precisely with the citation of Gandhi, we take it that it is the will and the determination of the speakers and hopefully of the world to live in harmony with nature. We engage here, those present here today, to construct on the synergies that we should find with all the ongoing endeavors, which are many, and that we should dispel whatever may obstruct the attainment of this major purpose of humankind. COVID-19 may have complicated this 2020 year, but your presence today and the participation of so many delegations and the ministers and directors of organizations has shown that even through these virtual tools, the year will continue to be the super year for nature, even enlarged by next year also, so we will have 2 super years for nature, and that the international community is ready to increase the ambition for biodiversity. This event has no doubt inspired us to invest in nature as a key component to sustainable development, and has inspired also to engage us to work with and through platforms such as the CBD, the Convention for Biodiversity, to foster this multilateral solution. We have a quest for a transformational change, the paradigm shift that incorporates the biodiversity into all aspects of daily life and at all levels, from citizens to organizations, to businesses, and to government, including amplified and inclusive participation from all stakeholders, such as women, youth, indigenous, and local communities. It also requires tools, as has been mentioned, especially finance and capacity building. So the mention of the need to reinforce precisely the most important element of all, which is the people, the participation of the people. We know this today. It was shared by many. But even still, we're woefully behind on the SDGs and on the key targets. The post-2020 is therefore a key element, a key moment to kickstart this decade of action and decade of the ecosystem restoration. We have much at hand, and we must not lose any more time. The delegation of Costa Rica, in the name of the organizers and my colleague Mona Jewel, which will wish to thank you, all the panelists, the participants, all those who have been here throughout, for the interest and the commitment that has been demonstrated here today. And we would like to give the floor to Mona Jewel, and afterwards we'll call for a family photo, which will be oriented by some technical expert that will take the floor afterwards. Thank you. Ambassador Mona.
Thank you so much. I think you have said it all, my dear friend. I think also this was important event on such a day. I am extremely happy that we were able to bring so many countries and so many high-level participants, including ministers from North and South, to speak with us here today. So I would just like to thank all those. I would also like to thank very much our colleagues, Rodrigo, who have been working so hard on setting this up. Because there is one thing with meetings like this, is that it's probably a lot of more preparation needed to be done in order to make it happen. But it's been going very well, and I'm very pleased with all those who have been involved making this important meeting happen. So thank you.
No, thank you very much. And now I'm told that for the family photo, what we need to do is all of us put the video on, and some magic hand from behind will make a picture that would probably be distributed afterwards. So let us all put on our video at this moment, and after that, the meeting will be concluded with our renewed thanks. And thanks for the people who have made it possible from behind the scene, which are the real builders of the whole session. Thank you. So put the video on, please. Frederick, you tell us something?
Yes, the video is broadcasted to the YouTube channel. I don't know how to make it happen on your end. Maybe there is a little button on top right where you can see all of you. And I will take a picture maybe of my screen here as well. Everybody smile, and okay, it's done. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Frederick, and have a good day, have a good weekend, and yes, let's get on living in harmony with nature. We are inspired for that today. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Adios.
Adios. Merci.
Adios.
Thank you for a great event.